Previously on Intervals in Music. Any of these intervals can be lowered by a half step. And if I go up by a half step, that's a minor second. With that, please don't say minor 5 or minor 1, the major second, the minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor 6, minor 7.
Hello, Alex here again for StepByStepMusic.com. Welcome to lesson 3 in our 6-lesson series, Intervals in Music. We've covered major, minor, and perfect intervals. In this lesson, we're going to make adjustments to all of those by making these intervals either augmented or diminished. Things are going to get freaky. They're going to get weird. Don't freak out. Come along with me. I know you can do this. Let's get started.
So here we are back at our major scale because it's the major scale. And we're here to learn today that any one of these intervals you see before you can be raised. When we raise that interval, we call it sharp. Let's take, I don't know, a 4. Let's bring it up a half step to this note, right? Last time we were looking at bringing the 5 down a half step. When this 4 gets pushed up and gets sharp, let's take that 5 out of the picture here, we call that a sharp 4. What a name for it. A 4 that becomes sharp is a sharp 4? That's brilliant. I know, I wish I'd thought of that. So we have a sharp 4. We can also see this on the 5. Traditionally, that's not super uncommon. We can see a sharp 5. The other place we're going to see this traditionally is on the 2. And of course, we're going to call that, you guessed it, a sharp 2. By the way, this symbol, this big old symbol I'm going to write for you nice and big so you can't miss it, that's called a sharp symbol. You could call it a hashtag or a pound sign. In music, it's a sharp symbol. And that stands for raising something by a half step. It applies to note names as well as intervals. But for today, we're talking about intervals, and so we can use it to raise an interval by 1/2 step. Traditionally, again, we're not going to see a sharp 6. Why? Just because we don't. We just don't. So that would normally be called a flat 7. It's the exact same note. Of course, here we can have a flat 6 or a sharp 5. You can always have multiple names by which you call an interval. But again, traditionally flat 6, we're just not going to see. We're going to learn why later on in the series. Again, part 5, we'll talk about spelling and function more. But for today, just learning the mechanics. Okay, so traditionally we see the 2, the 4, and the 5 as being made sharp. Now, I've got a fancy name for you. Yes, you can call it a sharp 2, sharp 4, sharp 5. We can also call them augmented. Augmented second, augmented fourth, augmented fifth. And that is their fancy name. Again, any of these intervals can be augmented theoretically, although traditionally we see 2, 4, and 5. You could see an augmented 3, an augmented 6, sharp 4. Sharp 3, sharp 6. But usually 2, 4, and 5 is where we're going to see those. So that covers raising all of our intervals all at once. Augmented covers everything. Any interval raised by a half step is augmented. Let's go back and do the other side. Last time we learned that a major interval, when flatted, becomes minor. Okay, well, what about the others? We have a fourth, a fifth, and an octave. That also could become flatted. Now, the octave and the fourth, typically, we're not going to flat those. That would be considered very strange. Don't care about why. We just need to know that we're not going to focus on it right now. The fifth, when flatted, is called a flat 5. Yes, you're right. But the fancy name is diminished. So you could say, how about that flat 5? You could also say, how about that diminished fifth? And your inquiry would apply to the same interval in both cases. So the rule is, any perfect interval, when flatted, becomes diminished. That's it. Again, mostly on the 5. Really not going to see that on 4 or 8, which is our other 2 perfect intervals. But flat 5, diminished 5, same thing. Here's where it gets really weird. A major interval, when diminished, is flatted twice. Here's a major interval. Here's a 7. And by the way, this basically only applies to 7. Yes, mechanically, you could do this for any interval. We're usually only going to see this on the 7s. We don't care why right now. We just need to learn that it's possible. So, a 7 flatted one time becomes a flat 7 We could also call this a, fill in the blank, please. Come on. You just learned this. Minor 7. Very good. Oh, I'm so proud of you. Very good. This interval can be flatted again. I know that doesn't make any sense just yet. We're just learning the rules. Just hang on to this for a second. This note can be dropped down one more time. Okay? If we drop it down again, yes, it's a 6. Shh. Don't tell the music theorists that. They'll get really upset. Just ignore the 6 for now. It's not even there. There's no 6 there. It becomes double flatted. Double flatted 7. Yes, we have double flatted 7s. We would call that a diminished, I'll just write dim here for short, diminished 7. So again, the rule is any major interval can be flatted 2 times, and we call it diminished. Another way to say that is that any minor interval, because remember we had a minor 7 here, can be flatted 1 time because it's already flatted, so it can be additionally flatted. Any minor interval can be lowered again to become double flatted or diminished. And that's exactly the terminology that we use. You'd say, oh, just play double flatted 7. And they're saying play the same note as a 6, except in my head I'm thinking of it as a 7. When we call something a double flatted 7, it just has different meaning to us. We'll get more into that because I don't want to confuse that in this lesson. But that's it. That's your diminished interval rules, is that if you have a perfect interval and you flat it 1 time, we call it diminished. Easy enough. If you have a major interval and you go and you flat it twice because you just wanted to call it a 7 for some reason, we call it double flatted or diminished. And like I said, this only applies really to the 7. I've never heard of any other major interval that needed to become diminished. And I don't want to hear about all the reasons why it can become diminished. Actually, you know what? I do. Go ahead and type in the comments if you know a reason why you should diminish an interval that's not a 7, a major interval. Have at it. Let me know, because I'm not aware of one. And here on this sheet, I'm going to show you the distances of the traditionally used augmented and diminished intervals. Of course, you can augment or diminish any interval, but I'm just going to stick to the ones that are very, very commonly seen. And even these are sort of outliers in the interval world. The augmented and diminished intervals aren't super common, but of those ones, there are some that are actually used. So I'm including those in here. Okay, augmented second. That's what happens when you take a 2 and you push it up by a half step. Okay, we have the augmented fourth. That's what happens when you take a 4 and you push it up by a half step, right? That's this spot right here. And of course, the augmented fourth, which some helpful person reminded us right here, the augmented fourth and the diminished fifth are the same size. So yes, we could take a 4, bump it up, call it an augmented fourth, take a 5th, bump it down, call it a diminished 5th. Those are both fine. We could also take the 5th and augment it. It's really the only interval that we traditionally see either augmented or diminished. You could really see the 5th in either position. And the diminished 7th, which if we zoom back just a little bit or a lot of bit here, we see, yes, that is the exact same size as a 6, right? But if someone's thinking about that as a 7, they brought it down to make it minor, they brought it down to again to make it diminished, they could definitely call that a diminished 7, and that would be perfectly legitimate. So down here, as always, I've got all the rules down there for you. So check those out if you need to. It's just spelled out in black and white, one after the other, because I know there's a lot of rules. Again, these rules are super simple. They're just new for you, so that might take a little bit of getting used to. So that's it. That's pretty much your augmented and diminished intervals. And before I let you go, I want to have a little bit of a celebration, a little bit of a graduation ceremony for you. In this graduation ceremony, we're just going to go through everything that we learned in the last 3 lessons. It was a lot of stuff. Each point was simple in nature, but it takes some memorization, takes some getting used to. So I'm just gonna go over all those with you. Again, this sheet is available for you to download in the description, so please take advantage of that. Here's the rules. Starting in the middle, the intervals from scale degrees 2 through 7 in the major scale can be referred to by their number. Okay, that's just basic rule 1. Here's our major scale in the center of the entire document here. So from 1 to 2, that can be called a second. From 1 to 3, that can be called a third. But we can get fancier with that, can't we? If it's a 2, 3, 6, or 7, right? 2, 3, 6, or 7, we can call that major. That's sort of its formal name. We have here the examples: major second, major third, major sixth, and major seventh. The others, the fourth, the fifth, and the 8, which we know is the octave, are formally referred to as perfect. So we can call these a fourth, fifth, perfect fifth, and we have these written down here, right there in black and white, or is it in sort of gray and white, I suppose? Perfect fourth, perfect fifth, perfect octave, beautiful. That's the blue box. That is your basic foundation of the major scale. Moving on, we can go ahead and look at the minor section here. Bringing it down, any major interval, when flatted, can become minor. We have the minor second, minor third, minor sixth, minor seventh. Going down from there, sticking on minor for a second, if we bring it down one more time and flat it again, we can have a minor interval flatted to become diminished, typically only seen on the 7. I've only listed diminished seventh here in gray and white for you. Over here, if we take a perfect interval, typically just the 5th, but could be any perfect interval, we lower it just one time, becomes a diminished interval, in this case a diminished 5th. That takes care of all the normal and all the lowering. Let's raise the roof here. Let's look at augmented. And any interval, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 can be augmented. Traditionally, we're only going to see the 2nd, the 4th, and the 5th, so we'll focus on those. And that's it. We call them augmented if they've been raised one time. So yes, you now know all the rules of intervals contained within one octave. Next lesson, we're actually going to get into compound intervals, which are intervals bigger than an octave. It's actually not super scary. If it sounds scary, don't be scared. It's not. We're going to make it really super simple, just a couple of rules there. And if you have questions or comments, by all means, let me know what your comments are. Let me know what your questions are. And if you need additional assistance, you can reach out to me at my website, stepbystepmusic.com. Thank you, and I will see you in our next lesson. Augmented and Diminished. Wait a minute. Let's not do that.